He gave the shivering stranger his coat, not knowing she was a billionaire who would follow him home and change his life forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The wind was a blade, sharp and merciless, slicing through the thin fabric of the city's evening skin. It found the gaps in worn-out window frames, the cracks in tired pavement, and the spaces between a father's hope and his reality. Liam stood on the corner of 5th and Elm, one hand holding his daughter's small, mittened one, the other clutching a flimsy plastic bag with a single loaf of bread and a carton of milk. The bus was late, its glowing sign a distant promise in the growing dark. He pulled his own jacket tighter, a threadbare coat that had seen too many winters, its warmth more memory than fact. His daughter, Maya, bounced on the balls of her feet, her breath a small white cloud in the frigid air. She was 8, an age where the world was still a place of wonder, not worry. She didn't notice the way her father's shoulders were tensed against more than just the cold. She didn't know that the coins in his pocket were the last of their grocery money, or that the library where he worked had cut his hours again. All she knew was that her dad was there, a steady anchor in the swirling chaos of city life. That's when Liam saw her. She was standing beneath the weak glow of a street lamp, a silhouette of quiet desperation. She wore a dress the color of midnight, elegant and impossibly thin for a night like this. It clung to her frame as she shivered, her arms wrapped around herself in a futile attempt to fend off the biting wind. Her shoes were delicate, the kind made for ballrooms, not for cracked, icy sidewalks. She looked lost. A porcelain doll dropped in a world of concrete and steel. People walked past her, heads down, collars up, each person locked in their own private struggle against the cold. But Liam couldn't look away. He saw the tremor in her hands, the way she pressed her lips together to keep her teeth from chattering. He saw vulnerability, stripped bare and shivering under a city that didn't care. Maya tugged on his hand. "Daddy, that lady is cold." Liam looked down at his daughter's wide, compassionate eyes, and then back at the woman. He didn't think. He didn't weigh the cost or consider the strangeness of it. He just acted. He let go of Maya's hand, walked over to the woman, and began to shrug off his own coat. The woman looked up, startled, her eyes wide and the color of a stormy sea. They were guarded, surprised, and for a fleeting moment, deeply, profoundly weary. "You're shivering," Liam said, his voice low and steady. "Here." He held the coat out to her. It wasn't much, the zipper was broken, and one pocket had a hole in it, but it was warm. It held the faint scent of old books and the lingering heat from his own body. She stared at the coat, then at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and something he couldn't name. "I can't," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread against the wind. "You'll be cold." He just smiled, a small, tired gesture that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm tougher than I look. And my daughter is right, you're freezing." He draped the coat over her shoulders without waiting for another protest. The fabric, worn and soft, settled around her like a shield. For a moment, she just stood there, clutching the front of it, her shivering subsiding just slightly under its unexpected warmth. The bus rumbled up to the curb then, its doors hissing open. "That's us," Liam said, stepping back and taking Maya's hand again. He gave the woman a final nod. "Keep warm," and with that, he guided his daughter onto the bus, leaving the woman standing on the corner, wrapped in a stranger's kindness, the weight of it more substantial than the coat itself. As the bus pulled away, she watched them go, the man and his little girl disappearing into the city's indifferent night. She didn't know his name, but she knew she would never forget his face. Serafina stood on that street corner long after the bus had become a distant red speck in the river of traffic. The coat was heavy on her shoulders, not from its weight, but from the intention behind it. It was a simple, threadbare thing, smelling faintly of laundry soap and something warm and lived in, like old paper and quiet strength. It was the most real thing she had felt in months. She clutched the lapels, the worn fabric, a stark contrast to the silk of her dress, and felt a tremor run through her that had nothing to do with the cold. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had come to this city to be invisible, to disappear into the anonymity of the crowd. She had left behind a life of polished surfaces and hollow conversations, a world where every gesture was a transaction, every kindness a calculated investment. She was staying in a penthouse suite at the Empyrean, a place where the air was filtered and the silence was worth $1,000 a night. Down here, on this frozen street corner, a man with tired eyes and nothing to gain had given her the coat off his back. He hadn't asked for her name. He hadn't seen the six-figure watch hidden beneath the sleeve of her dress. He hadn't recognized her from the covers of financial magazines. He had just seen a person in need and acted. The sheer, unvarnished decency of it was like a foreign language she had forgotten how to speak. A black car, sleek and silent as a panther, pulled up to the curb. Her driver, a man paid to be discreet and unquestioning, stepped out and opened the rear door. "Miss Vancroft?" he asked, his voice neutral. She didn't move at first. She looked down the street in the direction the bus had gone. It was a foolish, impulsive thought, the kind her advisors and her father had spent years training out of her. But the warmth of the coat was a tangible thing, a tether to a world she had only ever observed from behind glass. She had to know. "Wait here," she said to the driver, her voice firmer than she felt. He nodded, his face impassive. She pulled the coat tighter, the worn wool a strange armor, and started walking. She didn't know where they lived, what their lives were like, or what she would even do if she found them. All she knew was that for the first time in a very long time, she felt a flicker of something other than emptiness. She felt curiosity. She followed the bus route on foot, her impractical heels clicking against the pavement, a stark counterpoint to the city's weary rhythm. The neighborhoods changed as she walked, the glittering facades of downtown giving way to brick buildings with fire escapes and storefronts with hand-painted signs. This was the city's heart, the part that beat with real lives and real struggles. She felt utterly out of place, a ghost in a borrowed coat, but she kept going, driven by an instinct she didn't understand. Finally, she saw them. They were getting off the bus 3 blocks ahead, the little girl's bright pink hat a beacon in the dim light. Serafina slowed, staying in the shadows of a closed newsstand, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She watched as the man took his daughter's hand, and they crossed the street, disappearing into a modest, 5-story apartment building. The lobby light was a pale, weary yellow. Serafina stood across the street, the cold seeping back into her bones, and just watched the building. She didn't know what she was doing here, or what came next. All she knew was that a man named Liam she'd heard the little girl say his name on the bush'd, shown her a kindness she thought no longer existed. And in a world that had given her everything, that small, selfless act felt like the only thing worth having. The apartment was small, but it was filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the sputtering radiator in the corner. It was the warmth of lived-in love, of crayon drawings taped to the fridge, of a stack of library books on the coffee table, of the scent of cinnamon and something vaguely like rain-soaked wool from Liam's jacket, which now hung on a hook by the door. Liam watched as Maya, still buzzing with energy, recounted her day to a stuffed rabbit with one-button eye. He made them both hot chocolate, using the last of the milk and a precious scoop of cocoa powder. He stirred the pot on the small stove, his thoughts drifting back to the woman at the bus stop. He wondered if she was warm, if she had gotten wherever she was going. It was a fleeting thought, an act of charity in a life that had little to spare. He had no room for mysteries, no time for anything that didn't involve keeping their small world afloat. His wife, Sarah, had been the dreamer. She had seen magic in the ordinary, poetry in the cracked city sidewalks. Since she was gone, Liam's world had become ruthlessly practical. It was about schedules, budgets, and making sure Maya never felt the true weight of their struggle. He brought the mugs to the small, wobbly kitchen table. Maya took hers with 2 hands, her face lighting up. "Daddy, why did you give that lady your coat?" she asked, her voice muffled by the rim of the mug. Liam sat down, rubbing his tired eyes. "Because she was cold, sweetheart, and we had a coat to give." "But you're cold now," she said, her brow furrowed with a child's simple, profound logic. He smiled, reaching across the table to smooth her hair. "It's a different kind of cold, and seeing someone else warm, that helps." Maya seemed to accept this, turning her attention back to her hot chocolate. But Liam felt the truth of his own words settle in his chest. It had helped. That brief moment of connection, of simple human decency, had been a small light in a long, dark day. He glanced at the coat hanging by the door. It was just a coat. But for a moment tonight, it had felt like more. It had felt like a bridge, a fleeting connection to a life outside the four walls of their apartment. A life he couldn't afford to think about. He had Maya. That had to be enough. The next day, Serafina found herself drawn back to the same neighborhood. She had returned to her hotel. The night before, the borrowed coat folded carefully on a silk armchair, an anomaly in a room of sterile perfection. She had showered, ordered room service she didn't eat, and stared out at the city lights until they blurred into a glittering smear. Sleep had not come. In the morning she had dressed not in a power suit, but in simple dark jeans, a cashmere sweater, and flat boots. She told her driver to take the day off. She wanted to walk. She wanted to feel the city under her own power. She found a small coffee shop a few blocks from Liam's apartment and sat by the window, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. She told herself she was just exploring, just seeing a part of the city she'd never known. But she was lying. She was waiting. She didn't know for what. Around noon, she saw them. Liam and Maya, walking hand in hand, heading toward a small park at the end of the block. Maya was skipping, her pink hat a vibrant splash of color against the gray day. Liam was walking with that same steady, unhurried pace, a canvas tote bag slung over his shoulder, likely full of library books. Serafina's heart gave a strange, unfamiliar lurch. She stayed in the coffee shop, watching as they disappeared into the park. She waited a few more minutes, then paid for her tea and followed. The park was a small, well-loved patch of green, with a playground and a few sturdy benches. She saw them near the swings. Maya was soaring high, her laughter echoing in the crisp air, while Liam stood behind her, pushing her with a gentle, rhythmic motion. Serafina found a bench on the far side of the park, partially hidden by a large oak tree. She sat, pulling a book from her bag, pretending to read, but her eyes kept drifting over the top of the pages. She watched them for nearly an hour. She saw the way Liam knelt to tie Maya's shoe, the way he listened with his full attention when she told him a story, his head tilted in concentration. She saw the easy affection between them, the unspoken language of a father and daughter who were each other's entire world. There was a simple, profound beauty in it, an authenticity that made her own life feel like a cheap imitation. She was so lost in her observations that she didn't notice Maya had stopped swinging and was now running toward her, a determined look on her face. Liam was a few steps behind, a look of apology already forming on his. Maya stopped directly in front of Serafina's bench, her hands on her hips. "You're the lady from the bus stop," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. Serafina's heart stopped. She closed her book, her carefully constructed anonymity shattering. Yes, I am." Maya tilted her head. "You still have my daddy's coat?" Before Serafina could answer, Liam caught up, placing a hand on Maya's shoulder. "Maya, honey, we don't bother people." He looked at Serafina, recognition dawning in his eyes, followed quickly by confusion. "I'm so sorry," he said. It's okay," Serafina said, finding her voice. She stood up, her legs feeling unsteady. "And yes," she said, looking at Maya, "I still have the coat. I was going to return it." The lie was clumsy, but it was the only one she could find. Liam's brow furrowed. "You didn't have to track us down for that. It's just an old coat." "It was important to me," she said, the words truer than he could know. There was a pause, a moment of awkward silence hanging between them. Then Maya, ever the diplomat, pointed to the book in Serafina's hand. "Are you reading that? My daddy gets me books from the library. He's a librarian." Serafina looked at Liam, a new piece of the puzzle clicking into place. A librarian. A man who dealt in stories. It made a strange kind of sense. "That's a wonderful job," she said. Liam just nodded, still looking at her with that unreadable expression. "Well," he said, taking Maya's hand again. "We should get going." "Wait," Serafina said, the word escaping before she could stop it. "My name is Sarah." She extended a hand, a gesture so foreign in this context that it felt almost absurd. Liam hesitated, then took her hand. His was warm, slightly calloused. "Liam," he said. "And this is Maya." "I know," she said, and then immediately wished she hadn't. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken questions. Serafina knew she should let them go, retreat back to her own world. But she couldn't. For the first time, she didn't want to. That evening, Liam couldn't shake the image of her from his mind. Sarah. She had stood in the park, looking both elegant and out of place, like a rare bird that had landed in a sparrow's nest. There was a quiet intensity in her eyes, a stillness that seemed at odds with the bustling city around them. He had taken Maya home, made dinner, and gone through the motions of their evening routine, but his thoughts kept circling back to the encounter. Why had she been there? How had she found them? He told himself it didn't matter. She was a stranger, a fleeting anomaly in their carefully structured lives. But Maya was full of questions. "Is Sarah our new friend, Daddy? Does she like to read? Does she have a favorite color?" Liam answered as best he could, but he had no real answers. He knew nothing about her, except that she had a kind of sadness in her eyes that he recognized. It was the sadness of being alone in a crowded room. Late that night, after Maya was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table, a stack of bills in front of him. The numbers were stark, unforgiving. The rent was due, the electric bill was past due, and his paycheck wasn't enough to cover both. He ran a hand over his face, the familiar weight of it all pressing down on him. His life was a series of careful calculations, of stretching every dollar until it screamed. There was no room for maybes, no space for a woman with mysterious, sad eyes. And yet, he thought of the coat. He had given it away without a second thought, a small act in a sea of bigger problems, but she had kept it. She had sought them out to return it. That meant something. It spoke of a character, a sense of honor that he hadn't expected. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sleeping city. His world was small, bordered by responsibility and loss. Hers, he suspected, was vastly different. He had no right to be curious, no reason to let his thoughts linger on her. But as he stood there, watching the distant lights flicker, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of story she was living, and why a chapter of it had briefly, strangely, intersected with his. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. Liam went to work at the library, the quiet sanctuary of books, a welcome respite from the noise in his own head. He helped patrons find what they were looking for, stamped due dates with a steady hand, and tried not to think about a woman named Sarah. But she lingered at the edges of his thoughts, a persistent, unanswered question. On Saturday, a cold, gray afternoon, he took Maya to the library with him. It was his day off, but the library was warm, and it was free. Maya loved it there, the endless aisles of stories, a universe she could explore for hours. She was in the children's section, curled up in a beanbag chair with a picture book, when Liam saw her. Sarah was standing near the new fiction section, her fingers tracing the spines of the books. She was wearing a simple gray coat and a dark blue scarf, her hair pulled back in a loose knot. She looked less like a mystery today, and more like a person. She hadn't seen him yet. Liam hesitated. He could turn around, pretend he hadn't noticed her. It would be the safe thing to do, the logical thing. But then she looked up, and their eyes met across the quiet, dusty air of the library. A small, almost shy smile touched her lips. Liam found himself walking toward her, his heart beating a little faster than it should. "Fancy meeting you here," he said, his voice a low rumble in the library's hush. She laughed softly. "I was told it's a good place to find stories," "Sometimes," he said. "Sometimes it's just a good place to be warm." They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, the scent of old paper and binding glue surrounding them. "I wanted to apologize," she said finally. "For the other day, in the park. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." Liam shook his head. "You didn't, Maya. She's a force of nature, hard to contain." "She's wonderful," Sarah said, her gaze drifting toward the children's section. "She has your eyes." Liam wasn't sure how to respond to that. He wasn't used to compliments, especially not ones that personal. He changed the subject. "Find anything good to read?" She held up a book, a collection of poems by a poet he admired. "I'm trying to," she said. "It's been a while since I had time to just read." "I know the feeling," he said. Another pause. This one felt different, less awkward, more intentional. "Liam," she said, her voice softer now. "I was wondering, if you're not busy, would you and Maya want to get a cup of hot chocolate? My treat." It was a simple invitation, but it felt like more. It felt like a door opening, a door he wasn't sure he was ready to walk through. He thought of the bills on his kitchen table, of the precarious balance of his life. He should say no. But then he looked at her, at the hopeful, hesitant look in her eyes, and he heard himself say, "We'd like that." The hot chocolate shop was a small, cozy place, smelling of melted chocolate and steamed milk. Maya chattered happily, telling Sarah all about the book she was reading, her little hands wrapped around a mug topped with a mountain of whipped cream. Liam sat back, watching them, a silent observer. He was struck by how easily Sarah listened, how she asked Maya thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. She wasn't just being polite, she was present. "So," Sarah said, turning her attention to Liam after Maya had launched into a detailed description of a dragon's sleeping habits. "A librarian. Is that what you always wanted to be?" Liam smiled faintly. "I wanted to be an architect. I liked the idea of building things that would last." "What happened?" she asked, her gaze gentle, not prying. "Life happened," he said simply. "Sarah, my wife, she got sick. The plans changed. After she was gone, the library. It was quiet. It was a place where stories had endings. I needed that." He hadn't meant to share that much, but the words had come easily, naturally. Sarah didn't offer platitudes or empty words of sympathy. She just nodded, her eyes full of a quiet understanding that was more comforting than any words could be. "I'm sorry," she said, and he knew she meant it. "What about you?" he asked, wanting to shift the focus away from himself. "What do you do, Sarah?" She hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "I'm in between things right now," she said. The answer vague but not dismissive. "I used to be in corporate strategy, building things of a different sort. There was a story there, he could feel it, a story she wasn't ready to tell. He didn't push. He respected the walls people built, he had plenty of his own." As they left the shop, the sky was beginning to bruise with the colors of evening. Maya walked between them, holding both of their hands. It felt surprisingly natural. "Thank you for the hot chocolate," Liam said, as they reached the corner where they had to part ways. "Thank you for letting me," she replied. She looked at him, and for a moment, the sadness in her eyes was replaced by something else, something warmer and more hopeful. "I'll see you around, Liam." "Yeah," he said, watching her walk away. "See you around." He stood there with Maya's hand in his, a strange feeling settling in his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't had in a long time. It felt dangerously like hope. That night, after Maya was asleep, Liam found himself pacing the small living room. The encounter at the library, the hot chocolate, the easy conversation, it had all unsettled him. Sarah was an enigma. She was elegant and articulate, yet she seemed to have no roots, no clear path. She spoke of a corporate past, but was now wandering through libraries and parks, her eyes holding a deep, unshakable loneliness. He knew he should be wary. His life was complicated enough without inviting more uncertainty into it. He was a single father living on the brink, his world held together by routine and a fierce, protective love for his daughter. There was no room for a woman who was in between things. But he couldn't deny the pull he felt. It wasn't just attraction. It was a sense of recognition, a feeling that beneath her polished exterior she was carrying a weight as heavy as his own. He thought about Sarah. She would have liked Sarah. She would have seen the good in her, the quiet strength beneath the sadness. Sarah had always been the one to push him, to encourage him to open up, to take a chance. Since her death, he had closed himself off, focusing solely on survival. Maybe, he thought, just maybe, it was time to let a little bit of light in. The following week, he saw her again. It was a Tuesday, and he was shelving books in the history section when she appeared at the end of the aisle. She was holding his coat, the one he had given her at the bus stop, now cleaned and neatly folded. "I believe this is yours," she said, a small smile on her face. He took it, the fabric soft and smelling faintly of lavender. "You really didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," she said. "It felt right." They stood there for a moment, the silence of the library amplifying the unspoken words between them. Liam knew he was at a crossroads. He could thank her, let her walk away, and return to the safety of his predictable life. Or he could take a risk. "I'm taking Maya to the botanical gardens on Saturday," he said, the words coming out before he could second-guess them. "They have this indoor rainforest exhibit she loves. If you're not busy, you could join us." Her face lit up, a genuine, unreserved joy that transformed her features. "I would love that, Liam. I really would." As she walked away, Liam leaned against the bookshelf, the folded coat in his hands. He didn't know where this was going, or if it was a colossal mistake. But for the first time in a long time he was willing to find out. The air inside the botanical gardens was thick and humid, a tropical dreamscape in the heart of the winter-gripped city. Water trickled over moss-covered rocks, and the scent of damp earth and exotic blossoms hung heavy in the air. Maya was in heaven, her eyes wide as she pointed out brightly colored birds and enormous, fan-like leaves. Liam watched her, but his attention was split. A part of him was focused on his daughter's joy, but the other part was acutely aware of Sarah walking beside him. She moved through the lush greenery with a quiet grace, her expression one of genuine wonder. She had shed her city armor, wearing a simple green sweater that mirrored the foliage around them. For the first time, she looked completely at ease, as if she had found a place where she could finally breathe. "This is incredible," she murmured, her fingers lightly brushing against a broad waxy leaf. "I didn't even know this was here." "It was Sarah's favorite place," Liam found himself saying. The words were quiet, but they held the weight of a shared history. She said it was like stepping into another world, a place where anything could grow. Sarah looked at him, her eyes soft with an empathy that needed no words. "She must have been very special." "She was," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "She would have liked you. You have the same look in your eyes when you see something beautiful." Sarah's cheeks flushed slightly, and she looked away, toward a waterfall cascading into a small, clear pool. They walked in a comfortable silence for a while, Maya darting ahead to inspect a row of vibrant orchids. Liam found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. With Sarah, he didn't feel the need to perform or pretend. He could just be Liam, a father, a librarian, a man still navigating the landscape of grief. She didn't look at him with pity, nor did she treat him like a project. She simply saw him. As they were leaving, Maya, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Sarah," she said, her voice serious. "Are you a fairy queen?" Sarah blinked, then laughed, a clear, bright sound that echoed in the glass-domed building. "What makes you say that, sweetheart?" "Because you're pretty," Maya said, "and you seem sad, like you lost your kingdom. And you're nice to my daddy, out of the mouths of babes." Liam felt a blush creep up his neck. "Maya," but Sarah just knelt, taking Maya's hands in hers. "Well, I'm not a queen," she said gently, "but sometimes it does feel like I've lost my way." Maybe you and your daddy can help me find the map." Later that evening, after he had tucked Maya into bed, Liam stood in his kitchen, the scent of the gardens still clinging to his clothes. He replayed the day in his mind. Sarah's laughter, the shared silences, the easy way she had fit into their small two-person world. The fear was still there, a low hum of caution in the back of his mind, but it was being overshadowed by something else, something warmer and more compelling. He thought of her words. "Maybe you and your daddy can help me find the map." He didn't know if he had any maps to offer. He was lost in his own ways. But the idea of searching for a path together, of navigating the wilderness of their lives side by side, was a thought that didn't scare him. It intrigued him. It gave him hope. And hope, he was beginning to realize, was a risk worth taking. The following week, their tentative friendship began to blossom into something more. They fell into an easy rhythm. Sarah would meet them at the park after school or drop by the library with coffee. She helped Maya with a school project, a diorama of the solar system, her long, elegant fingers surprisingly deft with glue and glitter. Liam, in turn, started to open up, sharing stories about his life with Sarah, about his dreams of being an architect, dreams he had carefully packed away like old blueprints. One evening, she invited them to her place for dinner. Liam hesitated. He had only ever seen her in his world, on his turf. Stepping into hers felt like a significant shift. "It's nothing fancy," she had assured him. "I'm not much of a cook, so I was thinking takeout. But my view is pretty good." Her apartment, it turned out, was the penthouse suite at the Empyrean. The doorman, dressed in a crisp uniform, greeted her by name, his eyes flicking to Liam and Maya with a polite, practiced neutrality. The elevator ascended in a silent, breathtaking rush, opening directly into her suite. The space was vast and minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a jaw-dropping panorama of the city. The furniture was sleek and modern, the art on the walls abstract and expensive. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly impersonal. Liam felt a knot of insecurity tighten in his stomach. This was her world, a world of wealth and power he couldn't even begin to comprehend. Maya, however, was unfazed. She ran to the window, her small hands pressed against the glass. "Daddy, look! Our building is a tiny little speck." Sarah watched them, her expression unreadable. "I know it's a lot," she said quietly. "It's not really me. It's just a place to stay." They ate Chinese takeout from white cartons, sitting on a plush sofa that probably cost more than his car. The food was a grounding, familiar presence in the opulent surroundings. As they ate, Liam noticed the small things. There were no personal photos, no cluttered shelves, no signs of a life lived, only a life occupied. It was the loneliest space he had ever been in. After dinner, while Maya was engrossed in a cartoon on a television that seemed to materialize from a wall, Liam helped Sarah clear the cartons. They stood in the sleek stainless steel kitchen, the city lights twinkling below them like a fallen constellation. "This is a long way from the bus stop," he said, his voice quiet. Sarah leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. "Sometimes I feel like I'm still standing there," she confessed, shivering. "You don't have to," he said. She looked at him, her stormy eyes searching his. "You seem so grounded, Liam. You and Maya, you have this anchor. I've been adrift for a long time." He took a step closer, the space between them shrinking. "Maybe you just needed to find a safe harbor." He hadn't planned to say it, hadn't planned to do what he did next, but it felt like the most natural thing in the world. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. Her skin was soft, and she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a brief second. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss. It was quiet, tender, and full of all the unspoken things that had been growing between them. It was a question and an answer all at once. When he pulled back, they just looked at each other, the city's glittering chaos, a distant backdrop to the quiet truth that had finally found its voice in the heart of that lonely, beautiful room. The kiss lingered in the air between them, a silent testament to a boundary crossed. Serafina's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, a wild, unfamiliar rhythm. Liam's hand was still on her cheek, his thumb gently stroking her skin, and his eyes, warm and steady, held a question she wasn't sure how to answer. She had spent years perfecting a fortress of composure, of cool, calculated distance. One kiss, one moment of genuine, unvarnished tenderness, and the walls were threatening to crumble. She stepped back, not out of rejection, but out of a deep, instinctual fear. The movement was small, but it was enough to break the spell. Liam's hand dropped, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Sarah?" he asked, his voice low. That was—" She started, but the words wouldn't form. How could she explain the maelstrom inside her? How could she tell him that his simple, honest affection terrified her more than any boardroom battle ever had? Because in her world, tenderness was a weapon. It was the bait used to lower your defenses before the kill. She thought of Marcus, her former fiancé and business partner. He had wooed her with poetry and quiet understanding, made her believe he saw the woman beneath the heiress. He had earned her trust, her love, her deepest vulnerabilities, and then used them to orchestrate a corporate takeover that nearly destroyed her father's company and her own reputation. He had taught her that love was just another word for leverage. "I'm sorry," she whispered, turning away to face the vast, glittering expanse of the city below. I'm not good at this." Liam came to stand beside her, not touching, but his presence a warm, solid thing in the cold, sterile room. "At what? Being kissed?" "At trusting it," she said, her voice barely audible. "Every time I've let my guard down, Liam, I've been burned. Badly." He didn't press for details. He didn't need to. He could hear the echo of pain in her voice. "I'm not him, Sarah," he said quietly, and the fact that he seemed to understand without knowing was almost her undoing. "I know," she said, her gaze fixed on a distant, blinking light. "My head knows that, but my heart, it's a little slower to catch up. It's been in lockdown for a long time." He nodded, a slow, understanding gesture. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer empty promises. He just gave her space, a quiet, respectful distance that was more intimate than any touch. Maya's voice piped up from the other room. "Is the movie over?" The moment was broken. Liam went to check on her, his departure leaving a void in the air beside Serafina. She stayed at the window, one hand pressed against the cold glass, her reflection a pale, ghostly image against the city's indifferent beauty. She had wanted this. She had wanted to feel something real. But now that it was here, she was terrified she would be the one to break it. The walk home was quiet. Liam held Maya's sleeping form in his arms, her head resting on his shoulder, her breath a soft, warm puff against his neck. The city streets were emptier now, the wind having died down to a low whisper. He didn't take a cab. He wanted the time to think, to let the events of the evening settle. The kiss had changed everything. It had taken their tentative, unspoken connection and given it a name. But her reaction, her swift, fearful retreat, had created a new, more complicated silence between them. He understood her fear. He had his own. Every day, he walked a tightrope of financial and emotional survival. Letting someone into that fragile ecosystem was a risk of monumental proportions. If he fell, he wasn't the only one who would get hurt. Maya would too. But as he looked down at his daughter's peaceful face, he knew that he couldn't live his life in a state of perpetual caution. Sarah wouldn't have wanted that for him, or for Maya. She would have wanted them to embrace life, to be open to love, even if it came with the risk of pain. He reached his building, the familiar sight of its worn brick facade, a comforting anchor. He managed the keys and the door while still holding Maya, his movements practiced and sure. Inside their small apartment, he laid her gently in her bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. He stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her sleep. She was his world, his reason for everything. But maybe, just maybe, his world had room to grow. Maybe it needed to. He walked back into the living room and saw the book Sarah had lent him sitting on the coffee table. He picked it up, her presence lingering in the smooth feel of the cover, the faint scent of her perfume clinging to the pages. He wasn't naive. He knew the chasm between their worlds was vast. She lived in a penthouse, and he lived in a walk-up with a leaky faucet. But the real distance wasn't measured in square footage or bank accounts. It was measured in trust. She was afraid to trust him, and he was afraid to trust that someone like her could ever truly want a life like his. He sat down on his worn-out couch, the city's glow filtering through the window, and made a decision. He wasn't going to push her. He wasn't going to run. He was going to be patient. He was going to be the steady, grounded man she thought he was. He was going to show her, through his actions, not his words, that some harbors were safe. Some people were worth the risk. Because as much as it scared him, he was starting to believe that she was. The headline hit the internet like a lightning strike. It was a slow Thursday at the library, the air thick with the smell of rain and old paper, when Liam's co-worker, a kindly older woman named Martha, cleared her throat and slid her tablet across the circulation desk. "Liam," she said, her voice laced with a gentle concern, "I think you need to see this." The article was from a notorious city gossip blog, its title splashy and cruel. Mystery Librarian or Cinderella's Latest Project. Billionaire Heiress Serafina Vancroft's Secret Slumming. Beneath the headline was a grainy, long-lens photo of him and Sarah, taken outside the botanical gardens. They were smiling, caught in a moment of unguarded happiness. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation and veiled contempt. It detailed Serafina's recent withdrawal from public life, her family's corporate empire, and her reputation as an ice queen. It then painted Liam as her latest pet project, a charity case. She was using to add a touch of blue-collar authenticity to her otherwise sterile existence. It mentioned his financial struggles, his job at the library, even Maya, referring to her as a conveniently adorable accessory. Liam felt the blood drain from his face. The words were a physical assault, twisting something pure and tentative into something ugly and transactional. He felt exposed, violated, his private life dissected and served up for public consumption. He thought of Maya. He thought of her school, her friends, the potential for this poison to seep into her world. A cold, hard anger, the likes of which he hadn't felt in years, settled in his gut. His phone started buzzing in his pocket, a text from his sister with a link to the article and a string of question marks. Then another, and another. The fortress he had so carefully built around his life had been breached. He looked up at Martha, who was watching him with worried eyes. "I have to go," he said, his voice strained. He didn't wait for a response. He walked out of the library, the bell above the door chiming mockingly, and stepped out into the rain. He walked without direction, the cold drops plastering his hair to his forehead, but he didn't feel it. All he felt was the icy burn of humiliation, and the fierce, protective rage of a father whose child had been threatened. He knew it wasn't Sarah's fault, not directly, but it was her world that had done this. It was her life, her fame, her baggage, that had followed her here and crashed into his with the force of a wrecking ball. He had let his guard down, had allowed himself to hope, and this was the price. He finally stopped in the middle of a deserted park, the same one where he had first seen her after the bus stop encounter. He stood there, the rain soaking through his jacket, and felt the chasm between them widen into an impassable gulf. He had been a fool to think they could ever bridge it. Serafina saw the article at the same time. Her publicist, a woman she hadn't spoken to in months, had sent it with a one-word message: disaster. Serafina stared at the screen, her hand trembling so hard she could barely hold her phone. The grainy photo of her and Liam, a moment of such simple, quiet joy, was now a weapon being used against them. The words of the article were a venomous cocktail of half-truths and cruel speculation, but it was the mention of Maya that made her feel physically ill. They had dragged an innocent child into this cesspool, used her as a prop in their vicious narrative. She felt a wave of nausea, followed by a surge of white-hot fury. This was why she had left. This was the ugliness she had tried to escape. The endless scrutiny, the way the media machine devoured anything human and spat it out as a commodity. She had been so careful, so desperate to keep her two worlds separate. But her past had a long reach, and it had found her. It had found him. Her first instinct was to call him, to explain, to apologize. But what could she say? "I'm sorry my life is a circus and you and your daughter just became the main attraction?" The words felt hollow, inadequate. She paced her suite like a caged animal, the opulent room suddenly feeling like a prison. The city lights, once a source of detached beauty, now seemed like a million mocking eyes. She had thought she could have this. She had thought she could have a piece of his quiet, authentic world without contaminating it with her own. She had been arrogant. She had been selfish. She had promised herself she wouldn't hurt him, and she had ended up causing him the one kind of pain he was most afraid of, the violation of his family's safety. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over Liam's name. But she couldn't press it. The shame was too great. She had brought this storm to his door, and she didn't know how to make it stop. All she knew was that every moment she stayed, the storm would only get worse. He didn't answer her calls. 3 times she tried, and 3 times it went straight to voicemail. The silence on the other end of the line was a verdict. It was louder than any angry words he could have spoken. Serafina knew she couldn't just let it be. She had to see him. She had to face the damage she had caused. She found him at his apartment that evening. The rain had softened to a miserable drizzle, and the streetlights cast a slick, greasy sheen on the wet pavement. She stood outside his building for a long time, gathering the courage to buzz his apartment. When she finally did, his voice came through the intercom, flat and devoid of emotion. "What do you want, Sarah?" "I need to talk to you, Liam, please." There was a long pause, so long she thought he was going to hang up. Then the buzzer sounded, a harsh, grating noise that echoed the state of her nerves. She pushed the door open and climbed the flights of stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. He was waiting for her at his open door, his arms crossed, his face a mask of stone. The warmth that had once been in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, weary anger. He didn't invite her in. He just stood there, blocking the entrance to the life she had so carelessly disrupted. "I saw the article," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I know," he said. "Half the city has." "Liam, I am so sorry. I never wanted this. I never thought." "You never thought?" he interrupted, his voice low and dangerous. "Did you really think you could just walk into our lives, a woman with your background, and not have it follow you? Did you think the world would just leave you alone because you decided to take a vacation from your own life?" "I was naive," she admitted, her throat tight. "You were reckless," he shot back. "Reckless with me, and reckless with my daughter. They mentioned her name, Sarah. They put her picture out there for every creep and gossip monger to see. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" The pain in his voice was a physical blow. She saw the fierce, protective father, the man who would burn down the world to keep his child safe, and she knew she had handed the world a match. "I will fix this," she said, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "I have resources, publicists. I can get the article taken down. I can issue a statement." "A statement?" He laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "You think you can manage this with a press release? This isn't a corporate merger, Sarah. This is my life. My daughter's life. It's not a problem for you to solve." He stepped back, a gesture of finality. "I think you should go." "Liam, please," she begged, tears welling in her eyes. "Don't do this." "I have to," he said, his voice cracking for the first time. "I have to protect her, and right now, that means protecting her from you, from your world." He didn't slam the door. He closed it softly, gently, which was somehow infinitely more painful. The click of the lock was a definitive, heart-shattering sound. Serafina stood alone in the dimly lit hallway, the silence of the building pressing in on her. She had come to this city to escape her life, and in the end, she had only managed to ruin someone else's. The days that followed were a study in gray. The rain stopped, but the sky remained a flat, oppressive sheet of white. Liam moved through his life like a ghost, his actions mechanical, his spirit hollowed out. He took Maya to school, went to work, made dinner, but the joy had been leached out of their routine. It was just a series of tasks to be completed, a way to mark the passage of time. Maya was quieter, her usual ebullient energy replaced by a watchful sadness. She didn't ask about Sarah directly, but her absence was a palpable presence in their small apartment. She would pick up the book Sarah had lent her, trace the cover with her small fingers, and then put it back down without a word. One evening, she drew a picture. It was of 3 stick figures, a tall man, a small girl, and a woman with long, flowing hair. They were holding hands under a smiling sun. But the woman was drawn in a faint gray crayon, almost like a ghost. She showed it to Liam, her eyes wide and questioning. "Is she coming back, Daddy?" Liam's heart broke. He knelt and pulled his daughter into a hug, burying his face in her hair. "I don't know, sweetheart," he whispered, the words a painful admission of his own powerlessness. "I just don't know." He tried to be strong for her, but the weight of it all was crushing. The library, once his sanctuary, now felt like a place of judgment. He could feel the curious stares of his coworkers, hear the hushed whispers of patrons. The gossip blog had done its job. He was no longer just Liam, the quiet librarian. He was a story, a headline, a curiosity. He started taking his lunch breaks in the dusty solitude of the archives, surrounded by the ghosts of other people's lives, because it was the only place he felt he could breathe. He was angry. He was angry at the world for its casual cruelty, at the gossip blog for its careless destruction, at himself for his own naivety. But most of all, he was angry at the gaping hole Sarah had left behind. He missed her. He missed her quiet strength, her sad, intelligent eyes, her laughter that sounded like wind chimes. He missed the way she looked at him, like she saw something worth seeing. He had pushed her away to protect his world, but in doing so, he had plunged it into darkness. He had chosen safety over hope, and the silence that resulted was a cold and lonely companion. He had built his walls back up, higher and stronger than before, but now he was beginning to realize that they weren't keeping the world out, they were just trapping him inside. Serafina retreated into the sterile luxury of her penthouse, the world outside a distant, muffled roar. She cut off all contact. She ignored the frantic calls from her father, her board, her publicist. She ordered food she didn't eat and watched movies she didn't see. The silence she had once craved was now a torment, filled with the echo of a door clicking shut. She had spent her life running, building walls, keeping people at a distance. Liam and Maya had been the first people in years to breach her defenses, not with force, but with simple, uncomplicated kindness. And she had repaid them by bringing her chaotic, destructive world crashing down upon them. The guilt was a physical weight, a constant ache in her chest. She replayed their last conversation over and over in her mind, his words a painful litany. "You were reckless. I have to protect her from you." He was right. She was a storm, and they had been caught in her path. She knew she should leave the city, disappear again, and let them heal. It would be the kindest thing to do. But the thought of leaving, of severing that fragile, beautiful connection completely, was unbearable. One rainy afternoon she found the coat he had given her, still folded neatly on a chair. She picked it up, the worn fabric soft beneath her fingers, and brought it to her face. It still smelled faintly of him, of old books and quiet strength. It was a tangible piece of the life she had briefly touched, a life of warmth and authenticity that she had so desperately craved. And in that moment, something shifted within her. The passive, suffocating guilt began to curdle into a hot, focused anger, not at Liam, but at the world that had made her a liability. At the media that fed on scandal, at the corporate machine that valued image over integrity. At the people who had taught her that power was more important than people. She had been running for so long. She had let others define her, control her narrative, turn her into a headline. She was Serafina Vancroft, the Ice Queen, the billionaire heiress. But she was also Sarah, the woman who had laughed over burnt takeout and helped a little girl build a diorama of the solar system. She wouldn't let them take that away from her. She wouldn't let them turn her story into a tragedy. She walked over to her laptop, her movements now decisive, her purpose clear. She couldn't undo the damage she had caused, but she could change the narrative. She could fight back. Not with press releases or legal threats, but with the truth. Her truth. She began to type, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She wasn't just going to fix this. She was going to burn down the world that had created the problem in the first place. And she was going to do it for him, for Maya, for the woman she was finally ready to become. The article appeared on a quiet Sunday morning. It wasn't on a gossip blog or in a tabloid. It was an op-ed, published in the city's most respected newspaper, under her own name, Serafina Vancroft. The headline was simple, direct, and devastating. On kindness, cruelty, and the price of a stranger's coat. Liam saw it because Martha from the library texted him a link with the message, "You need to read this. Now." He opened it with a sense of dread, but what he found was not what he expected. It was not an apology or a denial. It was a declaration of war. Serafina wrote with a raw, unflinching honesty that took his breath away. She didn't name him or Maya, referring to them only as a father and daughter who showed me a kindness I had forgotten existed. She described the night at the bus stop, the simple, selfless gift of a coat. She wrote about the hollowness of her own life, the gilded cage of wealth and expectation. But the bulk of the article was a searing indictment of the media machine that had targeted them. She wrote, "There is a particular kind of cruelty in a world that takes an act of pure human decency and twists it into a cynical narrative for public consumption. A world that sees a struggling father not as a hero, but as a project. A world that sees an innocent child not as a person, but as a prop. This culture of invasive, predatory gossip is not just harmless entertainment, it is a poison. It erodes our empathy, it cheapens our humanity, and it punishes the very people who exemplify the best of us." She went on to announce the formation of a new foundation, funded entirely by her personal fortune. It was called the Coat Project, and its mission was to provide grants and legal support to private citizens who had been targeted and harassed by the media. Its first act, she wrote, would be to file a lawsuit against the blog that had published the original story, not for her own sake, but for the sake of the family they had tried to destroy. The article went viral. It was a bombshell, a story of a billionaire heiress turning her back on her own class to defend a stranger. It was David versus Goliath, except this time, David had a multi-billion-dollar slingshot. Liam read the article 3 times, his hands shaking. She hadn't done it to save herself. She had done it to protect him. She had used her power, her platform, the very things that had driven them apart, to build a shield around him and Maya. She had taken the narrative they had tried to force on her and rewritten it in her own powerful hand. He looked at the last line of the article. "Kindness should never be a liability. It is the only currency that truly matters. I am only sorry it took me so long to remember how to spend it." He closed his laptop, a profound, aching mixture of awe, regret, and a fragile, burgeoning hope filling his chest. The door he had closed so firmly had just been blown off its hinges. A week after the article was published, a quiet settled over Liam's life. The whispers at the library stopped, replaced by looks of respect. The reporters disappeared from his street corner. The world, it seemed, had moved on to its next shiny distraction. But the silence that remained was different. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. Liam knew he had to see her. The anger had dissipated, replaced by a deep, humbling understanding. He had judged her, had pushed her away, had assumed the worst about her world, without truly understanding the woman who was trying to escape it. He found her where he had first seen her, standing on the corner of 5th and Elm. It was a chilly evening, but she wasn't shivering. She was wearing a simple dark coat, her hands in her pockets, her gaze fixed on the flow of traffic. She looked like she was waiting for a bus she knew would never come. He walked up to her, his heart pounding. She turned as he approached, her eyes widening slightly when she saw him. They just looked at each other for a long moment, the noise of the city fading into a distant hum. "I read your article," he said finally, his voice rough. "I figured you might," she said, a faint, sad smile on her lips. "It was brave, Sarah, what you did." "It was necessary," she said. "I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them define you." Another silence stretched between them, thick with all the things they hadn't said. "I was wrong," Liam said, the admission costing him a piece of his pride, but freeing him in a way he hadn't expected. "I pushed you away. I was scared, and I blamed you for it." "You had every right to be scared, Liam." "Maybe," he said, "but I shouldn't have closed the door. I shouldn't have assumed you would leave. I should have trusted you." He took a step closer. "Maya misses you. She asks about you every day." A tear traced a path down Serafina's cheek, and she wiped it away quickly. "I miss her too. I miss both of you. So come back," he said, his voice a low, earnest plea. "Not to the penthouse, not to the fancy dinners, just back to us, to the park, to the library, to burnt takeout on a wobbly table." He reached out and took her hand. It was cold, but he held it firmly, warming it with his own. "My world is small and complicated," he said. "And yours is big and complicated, but maybe we can find a space in between that's just ours." She looked at him, her stormy eyes searching his, and for the first time the sadness was gone, replaced by a radiant, trembling hope. "I'd like that, Liam," she whispered. "I'd like that very much." He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes and lit up his whole face. He squeezed her hand, and together they turned and walked away from the bus stop, not knowing exactly where they were going, but knowing, for the first time, that they were finally heading in the same direction. The spring that followed was a season of tentative, beautiful growth. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something quieter, more real, and infinitely more precious. Serafina didn't move into Liam's apartment, nor did he move into her world of sterile luxury. They built a new world, one that existed in the spaces between. They met in the middle. They took walks in the park, their hands intertwined. They spent long, lazy Saturdays at the library, reading side by side in a comfortable silence. They cooked together in Liam's small kitchen, laughing as they inevitably burned the garlic bread. Sarah, true to her word, poured her energy and resources into the coat project. She became a fierce, articulate advocate for privacy rights, using her platform to fight the very machine that had tried to consume her. She was still Serafina Vancroft to the world, but to Liam and Maya, she was just Sarah. Liam, in turn, began to let go of his fear. He saw the way Sarah's face lit up when Maya showed her a new drawing, the way she listened to his stories with an unwavering attention, the way she celebrated his small victories as if they were her own. He started to believe that this was real, that it could last. He even dug out his old architecture sketches, spreading them out on the kitchen table one evening. Sarah had looked at them with a reverence that stunned him. "You should be building these, Liam," she had said, her fingers tracing the lines of a beautiful, innovative community center. "You have a gift." He had just shaken his head, but a seed had been planted. A dormant dream had begun to stir. One sunny afternoon, they were all at the playground. Maya was on the swings, pushing herself higher and higher, her laughter a joyful melody. Liam and Sarah sat on a nearby bench, watching her. "You know," Liam said, turning to Sarah, "I've been thinking about those blueprints." Sarah smiled. "Oh, yeah?" "Yeah," he said, a new confidence in his voice. "I'm going to go back to school, finish my degree. It'll be hard, and it'll take time, but I want to build things again." Sarah's eyes shone with pride. She reached out and took his hand. "I know you will," she said, "and I'll be right here." Maya ran over to them then, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright. She threw her arms around both of their necks, her small body a warm, vibrant link between them. "I love you guys," she said, her voice full of a child's simple, profound truth. Liam and Sarah looked at each other over the top of Maya's head, their smiles mirroring each other. The world was still complicated, their lives were still messy. But in that moment, sitting on a park bench under the warm spring sun, they had everything that mattered. They had each other. They had a family. They had a future they would build together, one blueprint, one day, one act of kindness at a time.